What's going on, guys? We are picking up where we left off last time, going through the legendary Wu-Tang Clan's discography, and we had finished off with the Genius last time, and this is his final solo release as of now. This album was most notable for having the song Paper Plate, which was a 50 Cent diss track, which was not overly well received at the time. I think in retrospect, it's got a great beat, it's got great lyrics. GZA did not necessarily bring the energy I think you would expect with the diss track, but it's really a solid diss track, and this whole album in general is a really solid album. It went under the radars for a lot of people. The track Life is a Movie it has a great underrated RZA beat. That's a great album. I would highly recommend that one. Inspectah Deck's long delayed debut album. So the story behind this was that Deck had an album fully recorded with RZA over RZA production, obviously, and then there was a flood in the RZA's basement, and it destroyed all the beats and all the masters and everything that had to do with this album. So they essentially had to start from scratch. And years later, this is what we ended up with. A lot of people consider this to be a classic. I'm not that fond of it, but I'm also not the biggest fan of Inspectah Deck as a rapper. I think he's a solid rapper. I just don't think he has the best flow. This is a solid album. I have nothing against this album. It definitely does not rank among my favorites, but I still throw it on from time to time. I enjoy it. I really wish we could have gotten that original album, though, with the RZA production. This album was considered a letdown by a lot of people. They did not consider it a worthy follow-up at the time. I actually think it's a fairly solid album. I don't think there's anything offensively bad about it. It may not be the most memorable album, but I think you can throw it on, especially if you're a fan of Deck. You can throw it on and enjoy it. You'll be fine. A lot of people did not like this album. It's fairly unremarkable. There is a track there with Masta Killa. It might be the opening track, Sounds of the Slums. That's a really good track. There's a few other key tracks on here that I remember really enjoying, but as a whole, this is not one that I revisit very often. I do really enjoy that cover, though. My favorite Wu-Tang member of all time, one of my top 10 rappers of all time, Ghostface Killah. I think this is as good as any of the other Wu-Tang classics. It's as good as Only Built for Cuban Links. It's as good as Liquid Swords. A lot of people kind of they don't sleep on it, because I think this is widely considered to be a classic, but they don't hold it within the same regard as the other classic Wu-Tang records, and I think that's a mistake. This is another one of my bootleg covers from when I had to reprint the backs. I need to actually replace this one too. But yeah, this is a perfect album. Ghostface sounds phenomenal on it. The way RZA mixes his vocals makes it so that his voice isn't as high-pitched as it would be later on. I enjoy Ghost's more high-pitched voice. I enjoy the voice he has on here. Everything about this album is great, though. Perfect album, front to back. And he is one of the few artists within the hip-hop community that was able to follow up a classic album with an album that is equally as heralded, if not more heralded. A lot of people consider Supreme Clientele to be Ghost's magnum opus. I think there's definitely an argument to be made there. He used a very interesting style on here, very stream of conscious rhyming. A lot of it doesn't necessarily make sense, even by Ghost's own admittance. It's just words that sound really fly together over some really dope RZA production. It's a perfect record. That's another perfect record, front to back. Definitely not as thematically cohesive lyrically as his debut, but as far as just saying some fly shit, Ghost is the absolute best at that. Widely considered to be a disappointment. I'm not a fan of this album either. Legend goes that it was actually a fairly decent record originally, and then the record label got involved and they picked it apart and put it back together, and this is what we ended up with. It's a very forgettable. It's not offensive in any way. You're not going to listen to it and be like, oh man, that was awful, that was terrible. It's not that, but it is definitely one of Ghost's weaker albums. Here's a hot take. This is actually my favorite Ghostface record of all of all time. Like of all of his material, the Pretty Tony album is my favorite. And this was another one where apparently the record label had their hands in it, and it's not as good as it was originally supposed to be. But that being said, I just think this is a flawless album. Very soulful, very clean. It's a very clean sounding record. It's not dissimilar to Jay-Z's The Blueprint in that way, and that sonically they're both very soulful, very clean. And this is just, I can't even explain how much I love this album. But this is definitely my favorite Ghostface album. It may not have had the impact of his other records. It did not have the impact of his other records. It's not Supreme Clientele. It's not Iron Man. But I think if you go into this one with an open mind, front to back, it's an amazing, amazing piece of art. This was a collaborative project with Trife to God, who was a part of Ghostface Theodore unit, which was Ghost's side project. Trife was really making a run at this time, proving himself to be more than just a member of a side group. He was a legitimate, true, solid MC, and this is a really good, solid album. I wouldn't recommend it as one of your first go-tos if you're just getting into Ghost, but if you're getting into Trife, that's a great place to start. Another classic Ghostface album. This was when he started working with MF Doom. He's got a handful of Doom beats on there. He's got some Jay Dilla beats on there. I believe Pete Rock's on there. This is a fantastic album. This is when he really started to branch out and do a lot more conceptually with his storytelling. There's a lot of great songs here. There's that Underwater song, obviously, I think everybody knows about, where he's fantasizing about going underwater with mermaids and SpongeBob and all sorts of wild shit. I don't like the album cover. The original album cover with him gutting a fish, I think, was a lot better, but he got some backlash for that, so they switched it to this. This album cover does not convey how good this album actually is. But this is a classic record. This is as good as you've heard. And as far as, I can't even say modern Ghost anymore, because this album's almost, what, a decade old at this point? But as far as more modern Ghostface albums, that's a great starting point if you're looking to get into Ghostface. This served as a companion piece. You can probably ascertain from the title, More Fish. This is leftovers and tracks that just didn't make it on the original. He's got a lot of guest features on this one, and they all deliver. His son shows up with some great verses on here. If you like Fish Scale, and you will like Fish Scale, you're going to like this album. This is just more of that. There's a lot of tracks on here that I would argue are better than tracks on Fish Scale. He has man, what's that song called? Miguel Sanchez. That song alone is worth the price of that album. Def Jam realized they could put out Ghostface albums very quickly and make a halfway decent profit on them. This is a greatest hits project, but a little bit more than a greatest hits project. You'll notice like they have Run on there, but it's the Run remix, so it has Jadakiss, Lil Wayne, Raekwon, Freeway. Be Easy shows up, but it's a remix with Ice Cube. It's a greatest hits project. It offers a little something for people that's new. It offers something for longtime fans returning. This is a solid starting point. My only gripe with this is that Ghostface albums are so vastly different from one another that a greatest hits project sounds very disconnected. Like, he has so many different sounds from so many different eras. You're better off really just finding the albums and listening to the albums themselves. This was a street record, basically a glorified mixtape. Does have a song on there with Prodigy, Trials of Life. That is amongst Ghostface's best songs. This is a solid one if you're a Ghostface fan. It's not essential, but if you're a fan of Ghost and you want more Ghost, matter of fact, the same can be said for this. Hidden Darts Volume 4. Again, this is a mixtape. Just a lot of ill Ghostface songs on there. It's got Angels with MF Doom. It's always a classic. This one is interesting because it sees Ghostface reimagine himself as an R&B artist. So every single song here has like an R&B hook. It has an R&B beat. That being said, it works a lot better than I think anybody would have guessed it would. There's a song on here with Fabulous called Guest House that is a fantastic storytelling track. I would highly recommend that one to everybody. Back Like That remix again. I don't know what Ghost Fascination with that song is. I don't like that song. But this is actually a really solid record. It's a very different record from anything that he's ever done. But for what it is and for what concept he was pushing for, I think he actually really nailed it on that one. The Wu Massacre was a trio consisting of Meth, Ghost, and Ray, and this album was not nearly as good as I had hoped it would be. I think it let a lot of people down. It felt very rushed, very thrown together. There's very few tracks where all three of them are actually together, which is crazy. You'd think that would have been a no-brainer. There's some reused beats on this. It's a solid album. I'm not gonna hate on it, but it definitely is not as good as it should have been. Though I do enjoy this album cover. There's 3 variations. Each Wu member gets his own cover. Obviously, I got Ghost front and center. Apollo Kids was a very solid record. Somewhat unremarkable in a lot of ways for me, in that it's not my first go-to or my second go-to or even my third or fourth go-to for a Ghostface record. But when I throw it on, I enjoy it. As you can see, he has a lot of guest features on this. Sheik Luch pops up, Joell Ortiz is on there, Game, Busta Rhymes. Solid album. Not a go-to, but you're not going to be disappointed by it. This was a concept record. It has a whole story behind it that's actually told very well on this. Like when I say this is a concept record, it's an actual storytelling album. And Ghost cohesively tells the story from the first track to the last track. It's narrated perfectly by him. The lyrics all reflect what's going on in the story. The production by Adrian Young, fantastic. It creates a great atmosphere. There's actually some comic books that also cover what's going on in the story. And this is just a really, really good album. I consider it to be a classic. I think anybody that's listened to it really appreciates how great it is, but I also don't think a lot of people have listened to it. But that's a classic record. As a Ghostface fan, it's a classic. If you're a fan of conceptual albums, it's a classic. If you're a fan of dope storytelling, that's a classic. This was a very interesting remix done by Apollo Brown. And this is infamous for the fact that they just sent Apollo the vocals. He had not heard the music. He had no idea what the original beat sounded like. They just gave him the vocals and they told him, create your own version of this album. I really dislike this, actually. I don't think it sounds very good. I think it's an interesting exercise, but I don't think the payoff was nearly what it could have been. Let me see. Alright. 36 Seasons. It's another one that's a great... Ghostface went off on this almost tangent in the second half of his career, where he just started really turning out these interesting, quirky concept albums. And this one isn't as heavy-handed, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's not as heavy-handed as 12 Reasons to Die. But he's going for the same thing on here. Like, it's fantastic ghost storytelling, great atmosphere, very dope. Reasons to Die 2, which was not as good as the first one, but also still a very, very solid listen. I think if you enjoy the first one, you're going to enjoy this. It's not as good, but the quality's just as good. It's just as good, but it's not as good, if that makes any sense. This was Ghostface with, what is this? Bad Bad Not Good. You may be familiar with their music. I'm not overly familiar. I know them from this project and some of their solo stuff. This has a great song with MF Doom on there, Elzai's on there, Danny Brown. This is a really great slept-on project. Very easy to listen to. It just kind of it flies by. By the time you even realize what's going on, it's done. It's over with. Masta Killa was the last Wu-Tang member to get his solo album out, but he also has one of my favorite especially when you consider that this was released in 2004. I think the song No Said Date, the album's title track, is phenomenal. I think this is a near classic album, maybe a classic. A lot of people don't like Masta Killa. I'm actually a fan. I really enjoy his style. He is monotonous a little bit, but I think he really pulled it all together on that album. Got some great production, great guest features. That's a classic Wu-Tang album. His follow-up, Made in Brooklyn, had some MF Doom beats on there, which was nice, but as a whole, it was not as cohesive. It was not as well made as his debut album. It's a solid follow-up, but it's much like the sophomore albums from every other Wu-Tang member, where if you're a fan of what he did on the first one, you'll probably find something to enjoy here, but you're not going to enjoy it as much. A lot of people dislike U-God. He's actually one of my favorite Wu-Tang members. For a long time, he was my favorite Wu-Tang member. This album did not live up to my expectations, which is ironic because a lot of people that don't like U-God actually enjoy this more than they thought they would. I just don't think the production... U-God needs a certain type of production to really make him pop, to make him sound alive. And this album just kind of... it's a slog to listen to. It's very dark. It's very, it just kind of marches on. It's a trudge to get through. It's not terrible. It is a solid album. It's a decently made album, but it's a hard one to listen to front to back. Like every single Wu-Tang member, even U-God has a side project. He had the Hillside Scramblers as U-Godzilla. I would not recommend this. I have this strictly because I like collecting shit. It's interesting, and it's good for a listen out of morbid curiosity. The same could be said for this, which was officially his follow-up album and then disowned as not a follow-up album. It was so bad, it was so poorly received that he kind of just disowned it and moved on. It's his attempt at making a more mainstream club record, and this is as bad as you would imagine a mainstream U-God album sounding. He did manage to turn it around on Dopium, which it's solid. It's definitely a step in the right direction. He got some much better production. He's got much better features on here. You can see Raekwon's on there, Slane's on there, Method Man pops up. It's a solid album. It might be the album I recommended if you really wanted to start on U-God. This would probably be the album I would say check out. It's not going to blow your mind, but it is easy to put on and listen to and appreciate for what it is. Widely considered to be the greatest Wu-Tang album of all time, the greatest hip-hop album potentially. I enjoy this one, not as much as a lot of people do. Raekwon is actually one of my lesser favorite Wu-Tang members, but there's a ton of Ghostface on here, a ton of great features, and easily some of the RZA's best production. This album is as good as you've heard. Even if I don't like it as much as some other people do, it is still everything that you heard it was and more, and it's a must listen to for Wu-Tang fans. His follow-up, which a lot of people did not enjoy, which again, anytime you're following up a classic, I think there's going to be room for a lot of disappointment. I actually think this is a fairly solid album. It's inoffensive. It's not going to disappoint you. It just kind of exists. He has 3 or 4 of these mixtapes, the Vatican mixtapes. I really enjoy them, even though, like I said, I'm not a huge Raekwon fan. I think some of his best material is actually on these mixtapes. And this one, especially Volume 2, I just thought was really, really dope. I really enjoy that. I would highly recommend that. Raekwon's side project, Ice Water, terrible, would not recommend. You can definitely skip that one and be alright. This was actually very impressive considering the trend of sequel albums being fairly mediocre. He was smart about this. This is almost more of a sequel to Fishscale than it is Only Built, in my opinion. Because with Fishscale, Ghostface reached out to all these different producers and he put together this massive, monumental, epic album. This is Raekwon's take on that. You know, he's got J Dilla beats on here. He's got Necro beats on here. He's got Pete Rock, Marley Marr, just a variety of really dope producers, a variety of really dope guest artists. Fantastic album. Not as good as Cuban Links, but easily Raekwon's second best album. After the fallout from 8 Diagrams, Raekwon said he was going to head up a Wu-Tang album and call it Shaolin vs. Wu-Tang. That never came together, and instead he put this out, which was a solo project. A lot of features on there. This album is good. It's fairly forgettable, in my opinion, in that when I listen to it, I enjoy it, and then when I'm not listening to it, I forget it exists. But that is a solid album. Moving on into ODB, the most off-the-wall, creative, absurd, wild member of the Wu-Tang Clan. This is a classic album. I cannot say enough good things about it. Just the fact that it has Shimmy Shimmy Ya's on there, Brooklyn Zoo's on there. Incredible, man. There's just so many classic tracks on this album. It is so well produced. It works better than it has any right to, considering how drunk he was when he made this record. But it's a classic. It's a classic album, and it's interesting as a juxtaposition to this album, which was his follow-up, which reimagined him as a pop star. There's a lot of Neptunes on here. There's a lot of singing on here. A lot of very poppy production. Dirty's just having a hell of a time, just really leaning into it. And this is, I won't say equally as good, but it's as good for different reasons. When Dirty was going to jail, and then obviously when he passed away, there was a rush to get out as much material as they could. This is a live recording. Dirty was not known for his live shows, so that should tell you everything you need to know about that. This was a compilation thrown together by the record label when he went to prison. It's most infamous for having a track with the Insane Clown Posse on there. You can definitely skip that one. When he was released from prison, he signed to Rockefeller Records and put this out as a prelude to his album. And this was really good. This was showing the potential of what he could do when he got out of prison. Pop Shots is on there, which is one of my favorite Dirty songs. It's a shame that the actual album that followed this up, which was Ason Unique, actually exists. You can go out there, you can download it. I've seen online where like physical copies actually exist apparently, because it was supposed to be released and then pulled at the last second. But that album is actually really solid too. I would highly recommend listening to that mixtape and then finding that album. And to end it off, Dirty's side project, Brooklyn Zoo. This album I had a lot of expectations for. I did not enjoy it. I did not like the way it was mixed and mastered, and I just did not like the way it sounded. It sounded very abrasive. I have not listened to it for a while though, so maybe my opinion's changed. But alright guys, that wraps up that shelf. Next time we will be going over here, we'll be finishing off the Wu-Tang collection. We'll be going into the Wu-Tang affiliates, and then after that we're going to be getting into some boot camp click, which is equally as dope. So thanks guys, I appreciate it, and until next time.